Hello, my name is William. I'm a recent graduate of Purdue University. I just finished up my master's program here, and I'm currently on the market, looking for full-time employment. The biggest ones I think I would like to talk about are really how the visible identities will interact with the invisible identities and just the additional conflict that that can bring up. So obviously, visible identities, I have African American features. I am biracial. That's another identity that keeps coming up, and it's one of those things where I grew up in both, but I'm only ever considered one. Um, but then how that interacts with some of the invisible components, such as things like depression, being anxious, being borderline Asperger's, or having things, a lot of those characteristics, and how since there's a lot of overlap of expectations and stereotypes, you just never know what someone is reacting to. And in many ways, for myself, I find the invisible ones much harder to deal with, because when someone knows the invisible ones, that adds a whole nother complication. But if they just know the visible ones, then it's easy to attribute something to that. And so that's what I want to talk about. The actual ones is very interesting. So one of the things I want to bring up is as I start talking, you'll see my eyes will look down. I'll maybe look at my hands, or I'll be using my hands. It's part of how I think. But one of the side things where there is that because of how I think, combining that with the African American expectations, it might come across as like shifty, right? Because my eyes might be looking back and forth. But in reality, I'm actually deeply thinking about what the problem is but people, all they'll see is someone who's like fidgety or twisting or things of that nature. It really felt like people looked down on me, like having my ideas constantly questioned, having everything challenged, like saying these things don't make sense. And it's one of those things where this goes back to how I think, where they didn't give me a chance to finish a thought. It was always, no, if we can't get this, even like in a classroom discussion, if we can't get the full A, B in 30, 45 seconds, we're going to cut you off, or we're going to assume that you're going A, B, instead of like taking a roundabout way and getting there. And the funny thing is that whenever I try to do A, B, they always start asking questions about the other things. But when I try to preface, like say, hey, I've accounted for this and bring it in, they're always like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, the hard part there is that when they don't know, in some aspects it's better, because then I know they don't know, and so I know they're not attributing it to that. There was a guest lecturer or anyone not in the program, they all loved my ideas. They all loved what I was doing and what I was sharing and the perspective that I was bringing. But it was the people in the program, because they're used to me like being sitting there and just basically being more passive, being more reserved. They treated me very differently, and so that's been just the extra things that I have to be consciously aware of just because of those interactions are huge. But then there's the issue, especially for African American males, of being the good one. And so it's tough, because it's like, no, this isn't because I'm African American. I'm not having this issue because I'm African American. I'm not good enough for all these other things. It's because of this other thing. But if I tell them if I don't tell them, they'll attribute it to me being black, which means that it's going to be bad for all black people. But if I do attribute it to this other thing, then it's worse for me, because not only do I have these other things that I have to worry about, that's even if they even bother to consider it. I mean, or whether they completely understand it at all. I mean, it's just, oh, this is just another negative thing about you. But we're still going to do all this other stuff that we were doing anyway. And so it's a huge conflict, because it's basically everything you do wrong or any sort of shortcoming, because you are one of the few people that of that group that they are exposed to. It's basically you are setting the example, because that might be the first exposure. It might be higher education. This might be the first black person that they've interacted with at this level, or thought with this level, and then you being the one that's sort of a letdown, and it's like, oh, black people just can't cut it. And it's just like, I want to say, no, this has nothing to do with being a black person. This is because of this other shit. And even with all this, sorry, excuse my language, and even with all this other stuff, it's still there. I knew I had to take these extra steps that no one else has to. or almost no one else has to. Like the standard person does not have to take these extra steps to learn these social skills. Now I know that I have to take those steps to learn these social skills. I went and did it. I definitely identify as having it, but it's not the most important aspect of who I am as a person. I'm still a whole separate person. Not whole separate. I am still a whole other person. Let's say it's, I'm still maybe 95% something else. So why is that 5% dominating everything about me? And so every single detail they know is going to be weighted much heavier than it would be for me. So, the only things you do know is, all right, he's black, he's a male, and he's got autism. Well, that's 1/3 of the things we know about him. So that's 1/3 of the weighting we're going to give to things. And that's if they're not prejudiced. If they're not prejudiced against African Americans, now is maybe 50%. But that's where asking the questions and the understanding are going to come in. And if you don't do that, it's just going to be this. Everyone's going to be in their little boxes with, that's all you're going to think about them as. And then you're going to keep everything in those boxes and fight to keep things in those boxes versus right off the bat learning that they don't fit in that box. Well, I think there's normal expectations. And I want to clarify, normal does not mean good or better. It's not about what's best. It's about what everyone expects. And so even if what you're doing is better, because it's forcing them to think or forcing them to engage in activities, it's construed as a negative because it's just making them expend more energy. And so they would much rather that you do the worst thing that's consistent and they know what to do and that's comfortable than to do something that might challenge their assumptions in any way, shape, or form about how things could be done. Figuring out how to adapt, not to the extremes, like they're not extreme like in the sense of like bad. It's just like everything you think about is just on the human spectrum, let's say this is the curve, like the people over in this 10%. This is that for most people to figure out how to adjust to being able to deal with that group is just so exhausting because it's the sort of thing where most people just aren't going to have to deal with it. I had one friend who I disclosed it to, and they were like, "Oh, okay, those things make sense." In the sense of a lot of the things that I did started making sense, and so he started making adjustments, and interpretation differences based on my behaviors instead of taking it how a lot of people will take it. Maybe cold or just awkward. I am socially awkward, I own it, right? Understand, no, this is just, maybe he's reached his overwhelm point where this is too much social interaction and so he's just got to go. Or this is too much social interaction, he's starting to get tired because he has to make all of his expressions. They're not very automatic. I have to make all of my facial expressions. It's not that they're not genuine, but they don't automatically transmit to my face. And so I have to consciously make them. And then as I get tired, it becomes harder and harder to make them. And eventually I'll just look like, deadpan. And I might be having man, this is fun, I'm having a great time, but my face will just be like this. And so it wasn't that I stopped having a good time. Don't make it a group, right? Don't silo these people into groups and say, we have to accept this group, we have to accept this group, we have to accept this group. Say, make it less about groups and more about behaviors in a sense. Hey, these behaviors may be not even assigned to something. Here's how you work with someone who exhibits these behaviors. Here's how you work with someone who exhibits these behaviors. Here's how you work with someone who exhibits these behaviors, right? Make it about the behaviors, not about these siloed conditions. Hey, this person has a hard time talking with people. Well, maybe that might be autism. Maybe that might be Asperger's. Maybe that might be social anxiety. Maybe that might be all these other things. Maybe they're just from a small town and this is a big scary place, right? But the goal isn't, hey, here's how you deal with someone with autism. Hey, here's how you deal with someone who is having a hard time interacting with people. And so you're not making it about the condition and all right, this is exactly what we do for this condition. You're making it about Hey, here's the behavior that it is, and here's how you deal with this behavior. Because then it's the sort of thing where anyone, maybe, like if you make it about the specific behaviors, then that's reasonable. Like, hey, this is how, you're gonna meet someone who has this specific behavior. You might not have to interact with someone who has this exact cluster of behaviors, but you might have to interact with someone who has this behavior or this behavior or this behavior. So here's how we're gonna prepare you to deal with all of that. When I was completely incapacitated, I wouldn't tell anybody, which is odd because that's the time you think you would tell people. But no, I've learned that as long as the disability isn't a burden to them, people don't have a problem. Like I've been like, yeah, I've suffered from depression. Always like, oh, you don't come across that way. And I was like, I know, I've dealt with it and all these other things, but I know. And they're like, oh wow, interesting. But like, and so it's not like, oh my God, we're gonna have to take care of this person. It's like, hey, this person has these experiences. It's not gonna cost us anything now. Then it's okay to disclose. Or maybe those experiences might be of some advantage to us now, like we could use that for information and so on and so forth. Then it's fine to disclose. But when it might cost anything is when it's really, really hard. Like it was really hard to disclose to my partner, my fiance, but I did it early on to get it out of the way, because if she reacted badly to that, then it just wasn't gonna go anywhere regardless of any other compatibility. And so a lot of times you just find, like, when it's in those situations, you just have to risk it and get it out of the way. But in any other situation where it might be sort of perceived as this thing that might be a problem for other people, you can't. But when it's sort of like on the fringe, so you think about a Venn diagram, right? The more of an overlap of the Venn diagram there is, the more it is easier to disclose it. But the further out, like the larger aspect of the issues that they might have, for example, it is, then you can't, because now all of a sudden you are this burden, right? Like a lot of the times you say something and people will be like, let's change the subject. Like you trying to share is seen as you like almost harming them, because now you're forcing this emotional thing on them that they now have to deal with. And so it's just like, oh, you're making me deal with stuff I don't want to deal with right now. Like the number of times like I've just been hanging out and people will all of a sudden, like after talking to me for a while, will start sharing these deep like secret stuff, and I don't know what it is. It seems like maybe it's part of how I respond to people, how I talk to people, but every single time I'm like, no, tell me more about that. What's going on with that? What's the system? Is this something like this? What's going on, right? It's trying to understand, I think, is the biggest thing. Because it's just, all right, this is what you have. Well, this is my assumptions about this, and that's the end of it. There's never any like trying to understand, well, this is how this could manifest. How does, it doesn't matter what the DSM says it is. What is it to you? You are an individual, not a disease or a disorder, right? You may have that, but it could be a huge spectrum of things. And so I think, like, showing that you care enough to even find out something about the individual would be huge. But that's one of those things where it's all the actions that lead up to it. You have to be a caring person, an empathetic person in general, and have that disposition. Otherwise, it's complete, you have no evidence, right? Since the cost is so high, you need something pretty powerful to make it so like, hey, I feel like I can talk about this. And so that's one of the reasons that I've also gotten a lot better at being able to talk about these things, is because now that I have said something, right, I have put myself at this sort of vulnerable position where they have information. Now it's like, all right, this person isn't gonna judge me for this, or person isn't gonna take it out on me, or all these other things. Like it may not be the same thing, but they have something, and so now I can share something. It's sort of almost the reciprocity aspect. But to do that, you have to be willing to put something on the line. Everyone's got something that you haven't experienced, and they have, good or bad. And so just because someone else has experienced something different and that you don't understand, just recognize that you've experienced something that they don't understand. And just because it doesn't fit into your narrative one way or the other, doesn't mean that it's not legitimate. And it's something that needs to be passed off as a personal thing. One of the things that is an aspect of my condition, I don't know how it manifests for other people, this is how it manifests for me. Let me make that clear. Is that you can't tell me because and have me accept that as the reason. And if you can't tell me more than just because, you should probably question why you're doing it. Number of times people have told me they've done something because, and then kept doing it even after you told them there was a better way to, or showed them there was an objectively better way to do it. And they just said, well, this is what we've always done. I can't just go with the flow because that's the only reason we do it, because of all the social pressures. I don't feel that. I don't feel those social pressures to just conform. I objectively don't feel them. And so that's why you just can't tell me because other people will say, oh, because, oh, and then they might think, oh, there's this social pressure, there's this social freedom, that's the reason. I don't think that. I just think, well, if we're trying to do this and we're trying to do that, why are we doing it this way? That's all that matters in the equation as far as I think. So you can choose to make that person who thinks only in, like, just purely based on what needs to get done. You can treat that person as a pariah and an outcast and say, oh, all these other things. Or you could recognize the strengths they have and leverage them. Your call. I'm a firm believer that almost regardless of whatever it is, there's some advantage. For almost everything, I believe, on some level for the society, there might be some advantage. I know it's like someone, like I grew up with an autistic brother. It was really difficult, especially since I was already socially awkward. Having your 9-year-old brother wearing his Blues Clues outfit to your hockey games with patches because he's outgrown it, but he can't let it go, and still having to defend him, like someone like, man, and just like, as someone who's already having a hard time making friends, having to then deal with that, and like he would have tantrums at the games and would have to leave, and everyone knew he was your sibling, and just it taught me empathy. And that empathy, even though I haven't helped as many people as I would like, that empathy has given me this disposition of understanding and recognizing all these other different problems that people have, and it gives me this perspective where my default assumption is to blame the situation. Very rarely will I initially blame the individual unless I've seen the individual do a lot of things. Typically, I will just say, this person is in this situation, and I will put the blame on the situation or the reason on the situation, which enables me to then treat the person as a person and help them through the situation, rather than saying they're responsible for the situation, deal with it yourself. And so, not saying and so that's my view on it, is like, even if it's bad, there's an opportunity for good to come out of it. It might be that, an injury brings a family back together, all these things. I'm not saying that was the purpose it happened, but a lot of bad things happen, and if there's enough people around you and there's enough connections, I think it can be good. If you're just by yourself and completely isolated and something really bad happens, then there's nothing to happen there. I mean, it's just bad, right? There's no one, the only person involved is losing, right? But when there's all these other aspects and all these other things, there's a huge opportunity for everyone in the group and the society to benefit, as long as they are willing to take that approach.